Does the fossil record support this? Here's a quick video giving kind of synopsis. You probably already know this, but this is a synopsis of what Darwin's theory said in relation to fossils.
He would have a branching tree pattern, and for a long time you would only have that one species, and then it would eventually branch into two species, and then more species, and different families and orders and classes. And Darwin's thinking, given enough time, those differences accumulate, especially under natural selection, if the environment changes. Those differences accumulate to the point where 1,000 or 1,000,000 generations from now, your great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren will be a different species.
So it is both logically and almost aesthetically a unifying picture, a unifying image that pulls together the whole of life on Earth. And for many biologists, that kind of unification is very important.
Okay, so that's the kind of the big picture, and the statement he made there at the end that for many biologists, this is important. It looks correct. It's like, well, this makes sense. You know, we all developed on this tree of life. Okay, so let's look at the predictions of the models. Evolution says that we should see descent from a simple common ancestor. Creation says there will be complexity from the start. Evolution says billions of transitional forms, separate, distinct kinds with variation within each kind on the creation side. Evolution says continuous increasing complexity. Creation says intelligent design in nature, that you will see signs that it was designed. Mutation slowly creating new structures, processes, or tendency for decay. Let's look at the issue of complexity from the start real quick, and I'm not going to talk about this issue long. I'm just going to give two examples real quick. Trilobites. Trilobites are extinct. Were extinct a long time ago. They were all wiped out basically during Noah's flood. They're believed by evolutionists to have been around the Cambrian time period, and just a little bit past that. They were one of the first animals, according to evolutionists. And yet, trilobite eyes have the most sophisticated eye lenses ever produced by nature. That's from Science News. And Stephen Gould, who is one of the big heavy hitters for evolution, he said the eyes of early trilobites have never been exceeded for complexity or of acuity. This is one of the first animals that have the most advanced eyes ever. I actually just read an article a couple days ago about the eyes of the trilobite. It's astounding. It's absolutely incredible. I was kind of like, well, how can they be so advanced? When I read what their eye structure was, it's stunning. Archaeopteryx is the proposed primitive bird ancestor that gets mentioned the most. That bird, it wasn't, this fossil shows things that it's not on the way to becoming a bird. It already has complex structures exactly like a bird. It has fully formed flying feathers, designed exactly what modern birds are, with different structures depending on which side of the feather you're looking at. Asymmetric veins and ventral reinforcing furrows on modern flying birds. The feathers are exactly like modern birds. Their supposed transitional bird has full bird features. There's nothing, it's not becoming anything. Wishbone, avian lung design, brain size, inner ear design, all is in modern birds. Okay, so descent from a common ancestor or complexity from the start? Okay, second thing, billions of transitional forms are separate, distinct kinds with variation within each kind. I remember I showed you this video earlier where Morgan Freeman claimed that there were that scientists estimate there were billions of species that have lived on Earth. Okay, this number, this billions that they throw out, is not because of the number of species we see today. I showed you earlier that they think there's around 8.7 million. And it's not from extinct species that we see in the fossil record. They say billions of species because of all the transitional forms that they know had to have existed as they transitioned from fish to amphibian and amphibian to reptile and reptile to mammal and all these different supposed things that happened that they teach in their tree of life. Okay, so they know these billions of species had to have existed. Well, Darwin recognized problems with this theory from the very beginning. One of the biggest problems was, where are the transitional fossils? He wrote in The Origin of Species that the number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed on Earth must be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. So Darwin knew it was wrong, and this was in 1859. So the question is, has that changed? Have we found these transitional fossils? Colin Patterson, he was the senior paleontologist at the British Museum of Natural History. He was answering a letter from a creationist, and he wrote that I fully agree with your comments on the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any, fossil or living, I certainly would have included them. I will lay it on the line, there is not one such fossil for which I could make a watertight argument. Stephen Gould, featured here in Newsweek article, in his article, Evolution's Erratic Pace, not from the Newsweek article, he wrote that the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. In any local area, a species does not arise gradually by the gradual transformation of its ancestors. It appears all at once and fully formed. Okay, what does he mean here when he says only at the tips and nodes of their branches? This is what he's talking about. The top half. This is what we find fossils of. If you look in any textbook, somewhere on the textbook it'll say, oh, this is the common ancestor. Somewhere between these two types of animals, there was a common ancestor. But guess what they don't put there? They don't show a picture of the animal. They don't show a picture of the fossil because there is none. And it doesn't matter how many of these diagrams you look at and how many textbooks, it's just a little node thing. These don't exist. Now, the bottom of this area, just to get it all around full circle, those are the biblical kinds. That would be the original animals. They're at the bottom there. And then we have the non-existential transitional forms. And overlaying that orchard model that I talked about before, it's also in your little program. It lines up exactly with what we see in the fossil record. Dr. Niles Eldredge, another evolutionist, said, no wonder paleontologists shied away from evolution for so long. It never seems to happen. Evolution cannot forever be going on somewhere else. Yet that's how the fossil record has struck many a forlorn paleontologist looking to learn something about evolution. I want to make a quick comment about some of these quotes I'm using. A lot of evolutionists will get really upset at creationists when we quote evolutionists making comments about how there are problems with their theory. And they'll say, well, you took him out of context, or you misrepresented him because he still believes in evolution. And it's like, well, yeah, I know he still believes in evolution, but there's nothing wrong with me pointing out that he's admitted that there's problems with what they think they should see and what they actually see.
This top-down pattern looks nothing like the predictions of Darwin's theory.
Darwin's theory is that there's a tree of life where you have one organism diverging into many other organisms and big differences appearing at the top. What we really see is from here up. This does not exist in the fossil record. If I were using a botanical illustration, it would be a lawn with separate blades of grass sprouting independently of each other. And those would be the phyla. Now within each phylum, there is subsequent diversification, but even there, I don't see the branches connecting that would make them a tree of life.
Darwin was caught in the grip of a deep dilemma. The fossil record showed him one thing, his theory told him something else. He comes to an impasse at this point, and he says, if this pattern holds, it is a genuine argument against my view. And I think 150 years later, we've added a great deal more detail to the picture, but I think the basic problem is still unsolved.
Comment I want to make about the video is that Dr. Wells, he made the comment that it looked like a lawn, and earlier I said that that's not the real creation thing. He was talking about the phyla. The phyla originally, in his view, was like a lawn, and then it diversified from there. So basically, the overall picture is the orchard that I've been putting. I just wanted to point that out if that was any confusion. This is a diagram in the Chicago Field Museum with So by and large, the public is not aware of the recurrent pattern of ancestral gaps in the fossil record of dinosaurs. Current museum displays usually do not indicate there are such gaps. For example, the illustration on the right from the Chicago Field Museum is not a record of discovered dinosaur fossils, but is actually a theoretical model representing evolution. So Dr. Carl Werner went and he toured museums all over the world, including Chicago Field Museum. And he interviewed the curators of the various paleontological fields, dinosaurs and bats and stuff. And you'll see some more of that in a minute. And it's very, very illuminating. But he interviewed the curators for multiple museums about these junction points, the common ancestor points. And this is the information he got from them. So this information overlaid on the diagram was provided by scientists who support evolution. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So we have lots of fossils of the different species of dinosaurs, the different kinds of dinosaurs, but nothing showing anything transforming from one type into another type. Actually, the curator at the Chicago Field Museum, David Raup, said, ironically, we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. By this, I mean that some of the classic cases of Darwinian change in the fossil record, such as the evolution of the horse in North America, have had to be discarded or modified as a result of more detailed information. There's still a lot of people that will put the horse evolution, you'll still see it in textbooks, you'll still see it in handouts in school. It's been completely debunked. Stephen Gould, all paleontologists know that the fossil record contains precious little in the way of intermediate forms. Transitions between major groups are characteristically abrupt. Gradualists, usually mainstream evolution is what he means there, usually extract themselves from this dilemma by invoking the extreme imperfection of the fossil record. If only one step in 1,000 survives as a fossil, geology will not record continuous change. So evolutionists from Darwin to present day have tried to explain this. The most widely accepted position is that we simply just haven't found the fossils yet. Okay? Does that hold up? This is one of my favorite videos.
Bats are warm-blooded flying mammals. Some bats use sonar-like echolocation to catch their prey. An amazing 1,000 fossil bats have been collected so far. Many of these are complete bats. Some show breathtaking minute detail, such as wing membranes, fur, and even stomach contents. Despite this rich fossil record, Darwin's predicted intermediates have not been found. There are no fossils showing a ground mammal similar to a mouse, slowly changing into a flying mammal, a bat.
You would guess that there'd be some sort of a bat precursor, but once again, nothing. Bingo, they just show up. And so, as you might guess that, there are certain people that think they were specially created. They actually are kind of a problem with the creationists who like to, if things were created, here's a very highly complex mammal with all these adaptations, and bingo, they just show up in some particular moment in time fully formed as a bat. Obviously, we evolutionary biologists and paleontologists don't believe that, but at this point we don't have a good fossil ancestor for them.
When did bats evolve from the land mammals? When is it theorized?
Well, it's also, it must have happened also in the lowest tertiary. But we have no evidence for this evolution. Also, the bats appear perfectly developed.
We don't have any non-flying bats, and so we can't pull something out of that, any kind of information out of that that tells us how they might have evolved.
What period of time did the bats evolve, do we think?
We have no fossil records of bats during the Cretaceous period. And this means that we are only depending on speculation when it started and what happened in that time. Of course, when we have the oldest bats, like Archaeopteryx, they were completely developed in their morphology and their flight apparatus, and also the messel bats were completely developed. So we can only speculate.
Opponents of evolution have seized on this lack of evolutionary intermediates in the fossil record. They ask, how many more bats would have to be collected before one declares the absence of ancestors a reality? For them, the fossil evidence of bats clearly speaks against evolution.
And the answer to your question you may be thinking is no, these curators did not know they were speaking to a creationist. So they did not know he was going to publish the portions where they admitted that there were no transitional fossils. So is the fossil record complete? Should we still expect to find halfway bats? 1960, George Neville, Evolutionists. There is no need to apologize any longer for the poverty of the fossil record. In some ways, it has become almost unmanageably rich, and discovery is outpacing integration. The fossil record, nevertheless, continues to be composed mainly of gaps. Remember, billions of transitional animals supposedly out there. We can't find the fossils. This is 1967. Transitional, I guess originally 1959. Transitional forms seem to be inordinately scarce. In Darwin's time, this could perhaps be ascribed with some justification to the incompleteness of the paleontological record and to lack of knowledge, but with the enormous number of fossil species which have been discovered since then, other causes must be found for the almost complete absence of transitional forms. Newsweek, 1980, the missing link between man and apes is merely the most glamorous of a whole hierarchy of phantom creatures. The more scientists have searched for the transitional forms that lie between species, the more they have been frustrated. And finally, Richard Dawkins in The Blind Watchmaker. This was 1986 originally. It is as though the fossils, were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists. Both evolutionary schools of thought, punctuationists and gradualists, despise so-called scientific creationists equally. And both agree that the major gaps are real, that they are true imperfections in the fossil record. The only alternative explanation of the sudden appearance of so many complex animal types in the Cambrian area is divine creation, and we both reject this alternative. I don't know how to say it any more clearly than that. By the way, Richard Dawkins regrets that he said this, because it is used over and over and over again by people just like me, putting out the truth of what's in the fossil record. 1 Timothy 4:7, but reject those myths fit only for the godless and gullible, and train yourself for godliness. These are myths. Okay, transitional fossils, some examples. The whale in recent years has become the big one that evolutionists say, oh man, whale evolution is clear. We know how whales evolved, and it's awesome, and it's proof of evolution. I'm going to talk about just two examples. The reason, I think one of the main reasons why whale became big for evolutionists is they started discovering some bones in the area, in the back portion of whales. And they decided these must be vestigial legs or vestigial pelvic bones or bones originally from legs. And this is what is taught in textbooks over and over and over again. In 2014, Smithsonian researchers published their findings on these bones, and they said, contrary to popular belief, these are not vestigial structures. They do have a function. That function is reproduction. They're used in reproduction for whales. Just because we can't conceive of a function doesn't mean it has no use. That is a little short-sighted on the part of our imagination. Well, not only is it short-sighted on the part of their information, but creationists knew this long ago. This is from Answers magazine, put out by Answers in Genesis in 2006, and there's articles well before this one as well. Even though it has a clear reproductive function, evolutionists call it a leftover from a time when whales walked on land. This is a textbook example of assumption passing as fact. Kids are being taught this. It's not true. They know it's not true. We've known it's not true, and yet it just keeps getting rehashed over and over again. Stephen Gould wrote a book, Dinosaur in a Haystack. I've got a copy of it here. And in it, there's an essay called Hooking Leviathan by Its Tail, where he talks about a recent, at the time recent, whale find. And he wrote, still, our creationist incubi, basically little demons is what he's calling us, who would never let facts spoil a favorite argument, refuse to yield and continue to assert the absence of all transitional forms by ignoring those that have been found and continuing to taunt us with admittedly frequent examples of absence. Okay, so he's complaining that we don't give them any slack when they find a transitional animal. So this is Pakicetus, the fossil that he was talking about, and then I'm going to be discussing briefly. This is how it was represented on the cover of Science magazine. I think this was 1983. So we can see it frolicking there in the water on its way to becoming a whale. He wrote, this is Phil Gingrich, the guy who discovered it, in time and its morphology, Pakicetus is a perfectly intermediate, a missing link between earlier land mammals and later full-fledged whales. That is what he wrote. And the entire article is anyway. These are the bones they actually found. Perfectly intermediate between land mammals and later full-fledged whales. That's all they found. And that's what was written about it. Now later, and so they speculated that's what the head looked like. Later, they found the rest of the bones. And guess what it looked like? That's what it looked like. They realized it was just a fast-running land mammal, not a whale at all. It's still listed as a possible precursor to whales by them, but it's nothing at all what they thought it was. Rodhocetus. This is actually my favorite. This is mind-blowing. It's this one right here. So this is a display at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor.
Scientists at the University of Michigan suggest whales evolved from this cat-like animal because of the similarities in the teeth, while scientists at the California Academy of Sciences believe this hyena-like animal evolved into a whale because its teeth are similar to some extinct whales. Biologists in Japan suggest whales evolved from a hippopotamus-like animal based on similarities in the DNA. Detractors of the theory ask, if whale evolution is so clear, and if the fossil record is so abundant, why can't evolution scientists agree upon which land mammal changed into a whale? There is great excitement in the scientific community over the discovery of a few important missing links between a land mammal and modern whales.
But what's good about these particular fossil whale specimens is that they do show us intermediates in the evolution of whales. We don't often get fossil intermediates, so we can actually trace the development of characters. Say, for example, the evolution of swimming in whales. We don't often have that opportunity.
They have a big exhibit on it in Michigan. I was just there. They have all these things just sitting out there. I mean, they're all there. I mean, you really have to be blind or 3 days dead not to see the transition among these. You have to not want to see it.
As evolution scientists claim the most spectacular intermediate fossil in whale evolution is Rodhocetus, an animal with 4 legs, a whale's tail called a fluke, and flippers. It would swim using its widened tail fluke like a modern whale, but it had 4 legs like a land mammal. A perfect transitional fossil between land mammals and aquatic mammals, just as Darwin predicted.
The fossil whale that appears a little bit later is Rodhocetus, and this animal had large tail vertebrae that indicate there were lots of room for muscle attachment. So here we see the beginning of the type of locomotion that's characteristic of the modern whale, using just the tail flukes for propulsion and not using the hind limbs.
We have a complete modern whale-type structure in Rodhocetus. There are not many modifications from Rodhocetus to the modern whale other than changes in size of the structures.
When this video series was being filmed on location at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the executive producer noticed a discrepancy between museum drawings of Rodhocetus and the fossils. The reconstruction of Rodhocetus had a whale fluke, but there were no fossils of the tail to confirm this. Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of Rodhocetus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on Rodhocetus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that the scientists think there was a fluke on Rodhocetus based on the other pieces of anatomy?
Well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rodhocetus, so we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on Rodhocetus.
Now, since then, we've found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arm, the arms, in other words, of Rodhocetus. And we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can be spread out like flippers are on a whale. And if you don't have flippers, I don't think you can have a fluke tail and really powered swimming. And so I now doubt that Rodhocetus would have had a fluke tail.
Many experts consider whales to be the best fossil evidence for evolution, but are unaware of these discrepancies. Opponents of evolution contend that whale evolution is nothing more than hopeful supposition. If museum diagrams are redrawn and corrected for various discrepancies, opponents argue that whale evolution is non-existent.
So you've got displays. The displays they're talking about are at the university where he works. So he discovered the animal, he made up features, it's on display, and he's admitted that, yeah, okay, we found those bones later, and they don't match up to what are on the displays, but the displays are still there. In fact, they're still in museums all over the world. They have corrected them at Michigan, and I have noticed that many of the diagrams now show it with normal mammal legs, which basically makes it obviously not transitional. I don't have time to go through all of these, but every one of them has something that's like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, putting blowholes in the top of the head because that would make it transitional. They never found that part of the bone at all, so they didn't find the snout at all. So it probably was down at the snout like a normal mammal, but they just put it up higher because that gets them the grants. Romans 1, 19 through 22. I know a lot of people are familiar with this. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God and neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. There's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Proverbs 14:12. They don't want to answer to a God and be accountable for their actions. Okay, dinosaurs to birds, real quick. I already talked about Archaeopteryx a little bit. Evolutionists' claims for transitional status. These are the reasons why they think this is a part bird, part reptile. They say it has scales, it has claws on the wings, has teeth, and it has a long tail. Okay, so let's look at these claims really quickly. Facts, scales, this one's really tough. Zero evidence of scales. None. It doesn't stop museums and artist illustrations from putting scales on it, but there's no evidence of scales on this animal at all. And yet you'll see scales all the time. On reputable evolutionist sites, they won't talk about scales, but you'll see it on other people's stuff all the time. Claws on the wings, okay? Several modern birds today have claws on their wings. The hoatzin has claws on its wings. The ostrich has claws on its wings. A juvenile it's turk or something like that. I can't remember. Anyway. Several modern birds have claws on the wings. That doesn't mean it's a reptile, unless you guys think that those are reptiles. Several other extinct birds have teeth, and the teeth are the wrong type. They're not reptile teeth. Dwayne Gish, creationist, he's one of the first big creationists in the kind of creationist movement that has come about in the last 40 years. He wrote that while modern birds do not possess teeth, some ancient birds possess teeth, while some others did not. Does this position of teeth denote a reptilian ancestry for birds, or does it simply prove that some ancient birds had teeth while others did not? Some reptiles have teeth while some do not. Current reptiles. Some amphibians have teeth, but some do not. In fact, this is true throughout the entire range of the vertebrate subphylum. Fishes, amphibia, reptiles, birds, mammals inclusive. Okay, just because it had teeth doesn't make it a half reptile. It's the wrong kind of teeth anyway. As far as the long tail goes, the concormorant has a long tail also, not as long as the Archaeopteryx, but when you look at the variation between animals that we know are the same species, obviously the birds are not the same species, but saying that it had a long tail makes it a lizard is a little bit crazy. They had classical elliptical wings like modern birds, fully formed flying feathers, we already talked about this, and the wishbone, avian lung design, brain size, inner ear design, all is in modern birds. Tim Beardley reveals that fossils of normal birds have been found in older rock strata than Archaeopteryx. So even if we didn't have all these evidence that it's not transitional, normal birds have been found by their own standards at a lower layer rock strata. Alan Fiducia, evolutionist, World Authority Birds at the University of North Carolina, said paleontologists have tried to turn Archaeopteryx into an earthbound feathered dinosaur, but it's not. It's a bird, a perching bird, and no amount of paleobabble is going to change that. Science Magazine, 1993. That is not a creationist production. That is an evolutionist talking there. Okay, Archaeoraptor and some other Chinese source fossils. in general. This is an article in National Geographic from 1999. The individual who got this fossil paid $80,000 from a Chinese gentleman who worked at basically a fossil factory. Okay? National Geographic sent it to, I believe it's Dr. Nelson, who they asked him to do a CAT scan on this fossil to verify that it was legit. And he sent back his report that no, it's not legit. It's made up of at least 2 different fossils. They added reptile fossils to the bird fossil to make it look like a really cool, archaeoraptor, a bird fossil again. And so he said, no, it's not legit. Guess what? They still published it. It was a total shock when the news conference came and they were announcing that this was a valid specimen. This is from Carl Werner's work. A valid specimen. We provided the data and our interpretation to the representatives of Geographic, and the scientist in charge, as he walked out of his building, said, well, all these Chinese things have been fiddled with. They know a lot of these Chinese fossils are fake. They published it anyway. The retraction came 4 months later. It was 2 sentences long. The original article was 10 pages. How many people do you think saw the article, the front page article, look, another evidence of evolution, another missing link, and then 4 months later, never mind, But how many people knew, ever heard that this was a fake? And they knew it was a fake before they produced it. Fish, a tetrapod, really quick. Tiktaalik. If you've heard of this one, this is the new one that supposedly came out of the water to become an amphibian. But as this says, evolutionists had similar high hope for the coelacanth fin. Coelacanth was an animal that had been extinct, according to evolutionists, for 80 million years until they found them alive in 1938. There are some countries where I think you can dine on coelacanth. So the Tiktaalik, also they found tracks, 4-footed tracks were found in layers by their own dating methods millions of years older than Tiktaalik, so it's not an ancestor of anything. And they said this highlights just how little we know of the earliest history of land vertebrates. There are hundreds and hundreds of animals that look exactly like they did hundreds of millions of years ago by evolutionary standards. Haven't changed a bit. And if you're curious, I've got books on them. It's amazing how often they find a fossil that looks exactly at this. Well, this fossil is 600 million years old, or 300 million years old. It's an ant. It looks exactly like an ant today. Exactly. And they say that in the article. They say, looks pretty much exactly like an ant today. All right, caveman, missing link. Now, in order to really understand what's been going on with the whole concept of missing link with ape-men, you have to understand the Laetoli footprints. These aren't talked a lot, but what it is, it's a set of footprints that were dated at 3.5, around 4 million years ago, and they're human prints, okay?
That's what makes the Laetoli prints so exciting, because they give us a direct record of how our ancestors walked almost 4 million years ago. When we compare the Laetoli print to that of a chimpanzee, the difference is immediately obvious. The chimpanzee, which is a quadruped but occasionally a biped, still has a free great toe, and that great toe extends out away from the foot and leaves a very distinct mark. On the other hand, when we compare the Laetoli print to that of a crime scene human print, they're virtually indistinguishable. The great toe is in line with the rest of the toes, and what this has done in the human and the Laetoli print is to create an arch. And that's a hallmark of typical modern upright locomotion.
Okay, so these prints were indistinguishable from human prints. I want to make a comment real quick. I realize I'm running over. We started just a little bit late, and we took a little longer break than I meant. I'm probably going to go about another 10 minutes. If anyone needs to leave, I completely understand. Okay, so keeping that in mind, when they find human prints that they think are almost 4 million years old, that means they have to find a missing link that walked upright. So that's why there's all this emphasis of, we think it walked upright because they have human prints. And so they have to find something that walks like a human. Ardipithecus ramidus cadaba, this is really my favorite. This is a Time magazine cover, How Apes Became Human in 2001. 7-page article, rambles on for 6 pages talking about how, it walked upright, it did this, it might have used tools, it might have done that, all this conjecture. It says in the middle of it that they know it walked upright because of the inch-long toe bone. It makes it clear that it walked upright because they found this 1 inch-long toe bone, okay? Now, the way all these work is when a paleontologist or an anthropologist, paleoanthropology, publishes their fossil find, it gets published. And then when it gets reported in the popular news media, Scientific American or Time Magazine, whatever, the last page is where they get other PhD anthropologists to come forward and give their opinion of it. And over and over and over again, they're the ones pointing out the problem with it. So on page 7, they interviewed Dr. Donald Johanson, the guy who discovered Lucy, and he said that beyond that, he's dubious about categorizing the 5.2 million-year-old toe bone. With the rest of the fossils, not only is it separated in time by several 100,000 years by their own dating, it was found 10 miles away from the rest of the fossil. Now, another funny thing is they didn't even put a picture in the article of the bones. This is all they found. That's it. And from that, they know it walked upright, it used tools or didn't use tools or all this nonsense. So my question is, if these transitional fossils and evolution is so sure, how does this warrant a front-page story, a 7-page article? How many millions of people saw this cover story? It's on newsstand, Time Magazine, newsstand. How we became human. Everyone sees that and goes, oh yeah, more evidence of evolution. Oh well. And yet, how many people bothered to read the article? How many people got to the last line in the article where the leading anthropologist, competing anthropologist, says, yeah, they found that bone 10 miles away from the rest? Very few. Lucy. Lucy is the most famous one. That's one everyone knows about. Lucy is amazing. Dr. Richard Leakey, who is the other best-known anthropologist in the world, said that Lucy's skull is so incomplete that most of it is imagination made of plaster of Paris. Leakey even said in 1983 that no firm conclusion could be made about what species Lucy belonged to. Okay, Lucy has toured the world, it's been in museums all over, and it's touted as the best evidence that we came from apes. This is just from a random article. I just thought I liked the quote, "Fossils are fickle, bones will sing any song you want to hear." And this will be shown so completely. In 1997, Nova ran a special in search of human origins. Now, if you look online, you can order old copies of Nova specials. You can order them on DVD. Some of them you can stream online. This is one you cannot order on DVD, and you cannot stream it online. I found a video of it, but it had been adjusted slightly. Someone had been talking over it, and I wanted the original, so I bought an old VHS tape of this on eBay to get a copy of it before they were all gone. And I'll show you why they don't show this anymore.
The ape that stood up, it was a revolutionary idea.
I'm going to stop it. Remember, they're looking for an ape that walks upright. That's what they need.
The ape that stood up, it was a revolutionary idea. We needed Owen Lovejoy's expertise again, because the evidence wasn't quite adding up. The knee looked human, but the shape of her hip didn't. Superficially, her hip resembled a chimpanzee's, which meant that Lucy couldn't possibly have walked like a modern human. But Lovejoy noticed something odd about the way the bones had been fossilized.
When I put the two parts of the pelvis together that we had, this part of the pelvis has pressed so hard and so completely into this one that it caused it to be broken into a series of individual pieces which were then fused together in later fossilization.
After Lucy died, some of her bones lying in the mud must have been crushed or broken, perhaps by animals browsing at the lakeshore.
This has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in an anatomically impossible position.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Can't make this up. So no kidding. You use a motor tool and you change the angle of the pelvic bones to make it look human, and it looks human. So they needed an ape that walked upright. So they made one. Don Johanson, the guy who discovered Lucy, said, "This was the creature we'd been looking for. The celebration began. Lucy became an almost instant celebrity in anthropological circles. Guess who else became a celebrity? Don Johanson." So how do you achieve success in a career field? You know, we give athletes a lot of grief for steroid use and all these things, and rightly we should. You know, politicians are known to do things in the wrong way to gain an advantage. But we look at people in a lab coat and we say, well, they're scientists. They have the same pressures on them that other people in other career fields have. The pressure for results, positive results, is enormous. When they go on these digs and they're looking for a fossil, they have to find a fossil or they lose their grants. So Johanson is a celebrity. This is the skeleton of Lucy right here. This is how it's displayed at the Houston Museum of Natural History, and this is pretty typical of museums around the world. It's displayed in different ways. Notice the hands and the feet. You can't see them on the fossil because they didn't find those. But in museum displays all over the world, it's human hands and human feet. Over and over and over again. We need it to be a missing link, so they make missing link hands and feet. It's not true. No evidence. Ron Irving is a leading medical illustrator and creationist. He was given an assignment to do some drawings of Lucy. He says, "I was told to make her more ape-like or more transitional in appearance. I had been given a cast of a skull and I was shown some drawings other artists have done of Lucy and was asked to improve on these to make her look more transitional. I had to make some things up while keeping the anatomical bones intact, like the temple bone and other features which are standard. I added more body hair, did another sketch. No, they said she's got to have more of this and more of that. I just kept adding and subtracting until I got what they wanted. I was uncomfortable as a Christian to be told that they wanted more ape-like or human-like qualities." That first video I showed you where it said, "Hey, these are just pictures, folks." That's exactly what's going on. Dr. Wells from Harvard, professor of anthropology at Harvard, in 1944 said, "A great legend has grown up to plague both paleontologists and anthropologists. It is that one of men can take a tooth or a small and broken piece of bone, gaze at it, pass his hand over the forehead once or twice, and then take a sheet of paper and draw a picture of what the whole animal looked like as it tramped the terrier terrain. If this were quite true, the anthropologist would make the FBI look like a troop of Boy Scouts." Guess what this is the display of? This is Lucy. This is Lucy, same bones, no alterations, displayed at the Creation Museum. Your worldview is how you interpret the data. In the interest of time, the rest of them really quickly. Piltdown Man, if you've heard of this one, it was a complete hoax. It was literally a manufactured hoax. A human skull combined with an ape's jaw. It fooled scientists for over 40 years. You read some details about this case, it's fascinating. It's really cool. They still don't know who really did the hoax because the guy who found it really believed in it. They think it might actually have been Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes books. They think he did it. It's pretty cool. Nebraska Man was on the books for 5 years. It was a pig's tooth. From a pig's tooth, they decided it was this. Cro-Magnon Man, over 100 years in the books. They've recently decided, oh, okay, it's really just a human. When you look at the variation in humans that exist today in skull shape and size and stuff like that, when they find a missing link, it's one of two things. It's an extinct ape, or an ape of some kind, or a man within the variation of what men exist. If you look at even skull shapes of men today, Aborigines, Caucasian, European and stuff, the skulls are slightly different shapes. We're all one race. We're all one human race. There's no difference in that. It's just there's variation, just like there's variation in all other animals. Java Man, Homo erectus, Neanderthal, Peking Man, hobbits. And hobbits is actually a term given. It's not, I'm not talking Lord of the Rings stuff. It's actually some fossils they found. They call them Ramapithecus. They all fall apart when you analyze them. I don't have time to go through them all. If you want to research it, feel free. The websites that I would recommend going to there are on the brochure talking about them. Headland wrote in 1997, fraud and new discoveries are forcing so much revision in the paleoanthropological field that the Time magazine senior science editor stated that so many facts he once believed as a former science teacher to be true in evolution have been found to be false, that he was forced to concede that just about everything I taught them, his students, was wrong. The ones getting the money and the fame believe in their find. Many other PhDs disagree, disregard as extinct apes. Key evidences of a toe bone found 10 miles from the rest of the specimen and joints adjusted to look human. Human footprints discovered in old layers drive interpretations. And again, they never would consider that maybe those really are human footprints. Media hides anti-evolution data. Few discuss any details. Emphasize pro-evolution, hide, ignore, or minimize contrary data. The transitional discoveries are controversial at best, show fully formed features, often completely refuted, yet continue to be taught, constructed of imagination, are extinct apes, fully human, known fakes, hoaxes, it goes on and on and on. So again, going to the predictions of the models, distant from a common answer or complexity from the start. Billions of transitional forms, no. Continuous increase in complexity, no. It was always there from the start. Mutations slowly creating new structures. There's no evidence for these things. 2 Timothy 4:3-4, I've already said it once. For the time will come when men will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. I talked about 2 Timothy 3:16, that Scripture is God-breathed. Always be ready to give an answer to those who ask the reason for your hope. Jesus Christ is the reason for my hope. It's not this knowledge. It's not evolution versus creation. If you're ever talking to somebody and what you're saying is not done in love, you should just be quiet. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. 2 Corinthians 10:5. All these verses are very important. I don't think any of them are more important than Romans 6:23. For the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord. A lot of these topics that I've talked about tonight, or all the topics that I've talked about tonight, can be roadblocks for a lot of people, where they see what the media teaches them, what their textbooks say, and they say, I don't need God, I don't need the Bible, I don't believe it, and that's why I'm passionate about this stuff. I want to point people to Christ, and that's really what this is all about in the bottom line. So I so much appreciate your attention. I'm so sorry we went over so far. If anyone has questions, I will stay here. If they kick us out, I'll answer questions outside. I love talking about this stuff. I hope we'll have another opportunity to do this and we can cover some other topics. But thank you so much. Thank you.